The radio was about to go dead when Officer Merrick Dalton stood there, listening to the dying man's voice through static. A deputy calling for help, a K-9 bleeding out in the snow, and a confessional warning. Don't trust them. They have our badge. Minutes later, the snow would erase the footprints, the station would burn, and Idaho's most loyal dog would be hunted, not by criminals, but by men in uniform. If you want to hear how the story unfolds and the four-legged hero, subscribe, stay, and don't look away. You're about to learn the true price of loyalty. Snow whispered against the windows, a quiet sound before the storm fully arrived. Officer Merrick Dalton had just zipped his dark navy jacket to the top when the radio on his desk crackled with static. It was close to closing time, that quiet hour when the heaters hummed and the empty station felt like a church with no congregation left. Merrick, 50, lean and sun-browned from years on rural highways, moved slowly, like a man who understood every decision had weight. His breath carried the faint smell of black coffee. Beside him, K-9 Rizzo, a black cane corso built like a block of iron, sat still and alert. The dog's heavy chest rose and fell like a steady drum. Rizzo never whined or barked without reason. He was a soldier of silence. The radio snapped, sharp as bone-breaking. A woman's voice pierced through the storm of static. "Tessa Bray? Copy? Anyone?" Her breath sounded tight, broken, like it was leaking from a lung. Tessa, the young deputy just a few years into the badge, always carried more hope than experience. Merrick remembered her first day, hair pulled too tight, nervous hands hidden in pockets, pretending she wasn't afraid. Now her voice came in fragments. "Dalton, don't trust. They're in the team. Ranger is down. I'm losing blood." Then the signal died, swallowed by snow and silence. Merrick felt a slow heat build beneath his ribs. Not fear, but something older and heavier. Recognition. 30 years in uniform had taught him how real trouble sounded. People lying never sounded desperate. Only the dying did. He lifted the radio and called dispatch, voice steady. "Copy. I need a trace on last." The reply cut him short. A calm, practiced male voice. "Tin Hiug Gia. Don't waste time, Dalton." It was Sergeant Corbin Ellis, a polished man who always looked like a politician using a badge as a business card. His tone held boredom, like someone annoyed at children telling ghost stories. Merrick stared at the radio. The heater hummed again. Rizzo's ears lifted. The man's instinct surfaced, the one that didn't follow orders, but truth. He didn't argue. He didn't ask again. He simply tightened his gloves and stepped toward the door with Rizzo rising in one heavy movement. Outside, the wind carried ice, pushing against Merrick's face like old regrets. The storm had not yet begun, but the world felt colder. Rizzo stood beside him, still and waiting, as if the dog too understood betrayal without needing words. Merrick unlocked the cruiser, the metal biting cold against his fingers. Before he climbed in, he paused, not for fear, but for a quiet promise only a tired man makes. No officer would die alone, not tonight, not if he could still stand, breathe, and walk into the snow. Wind pressed through the pines like a tired breath from the earth. Merrick stepped into the forest, each boot sinking softly into snow that swallowed sound. Rizzo moved ahead, nose low, heavy shoulders cutting a dark line through the white. The wind carried the faint smell of iron, sharp and bitter. Merrick felt it before he saw it. Blood, almost frozen, hidden beneath new snow. Rizzo stopped, his thick black coat dusted with frost. The dog's body stiffened the way an old soldier remembers a wound. He let out a low growl, not loud, just enough to say, "Careful." Merrick knelt, brushed snow aside with gloved fingers, and found a smear of red dragging toward the deeper woods. His breath clouded the air, warm, uncertain. Something else lay beneath the quiet: intention. The dog's growl deepened. Rizzo didn't bark, he warned. Merrick followed the line of the dog's stare and saw a thin wire half buried under snow, stretched low between two trees. He froze in place, eyes tracing it to a compact device tucked beneath the drift. Someone had waited for a rescuer, not a victim. Someone had planned for a second body to die beside the first. Merrick exhaled slowly, the cold burning his lungs. His mind sifted through every officer he had trusted, every handshake he had believed in. Rizzo waited, patient as stone, until Merrick stepped away, leading the dog around the trap with slow, careful movement. The trees grew thicker. The wind grew quieter, as if listening. They reached a narrow cut in the rock where shadows pooled like oil. Rizzo pressed forward, then stopped again. The smell was stronger now. Blood, fur, cold sweat. Merrick saw them under the ridge. A young woman face down, her wrists bound behind her back with a knot done too clean, too perfect. Tessa Bray, still breathing but barely, her hair frozen to her cheek, lashes clumped with snow. On top of her, shielding her torso from the wind, lay K9 Ranger, his black and tan coat soaked in red. The dog's pupils were dull but alert, chest fluttering in uneven waves. He had used his own body to keep her heart warm enough to keep beating. Merrick's throat tightened. He had seen loyalty in many uniforms, but never this pure. Ranger blinked once, slow, as if to say he had done his job, as if he knew the rest was up to someone else. Merrick knelt beside them, snow creaking beneath him. He didn't speak. Not to Tessa. Not to the dying dog. Words would break something sacred. He cut the rope on her wrists, and the knot fell apart neatly in his hands. It was the kind of knot only a trained officer would tie. Efficient, official, and meant to look like restraint instead of murder. The truth settled cold in his chest, colder than the air. He whispered only once, to the wind, to the silent forest, to whatever still watched with breathless patience. No one else is dying tonight. The wind outside had quieted, leaving only the low hum of the old structure. The abandoned rescue station smelled of dust, metal, and the faint sweetness of old antiseptic. A single gas lantern cast a soft amber light onto the peeling wooden walls. Merrick laid Tessa on a narrow cot, his gloved hands working with the careful patience of someone who understood pain and knew how to respect it. Rizzo stood nearby, heavy chest rising slow and steady, watching without sound. On the floor, K9 Ranger struggled to breathe, shallow air leaking past his blood-soaked fur. His black and tan coat glistened with frost that refused to melt. Merrick pressed bandages against the wound with steady fingers, but no human steadiness could stop a body that was fading. Tessa Bray stirred, her eyelashes trembling like someone waking from a nightmare she was still trapped in. Her voice came out raw, strained by cold and shock, yet steady with something fierce beneath it. Stride, weapons, fentanyl, Ellis. Don't let him touch Ranger. Her words seemed to scrape against her throat. She tried to lift her head, but the pain pulled her back down. Merrick leaned closer, smelling the copper and salt of her frozen hair. Tessa wasn't afraid for herself, only for the dog. It took him a moment to realize how much that meant. Outside, snow tapped the windows like soft knuckles. Rizzo lowered his head, giving a quiet exhale, as if recognizing the gravity of the name she spoke. Stride. A man who dressed clean, but left shadows behind him. Sometimes the most dangerous hands were the ones that never touched the dirt. Merrick took her phone, wiped frost from the cracked screen. He expected messages, call logs, photos. Instead, the screen showed nothing but an empty gallery. Blank lists where evidence should have lived. Deleted clean, not by panic, not by a criminal hiding in the woods. Someone with access. Someone who could erase a life from inside the system without leaving fingerprints behind. The phone felt heavier than a weapon. Merrick could almost hear Ellis's calm voice in the silence of the room, like a judge handing out a sentence before the trial had even begun. He set the phone down, slowly, like it might break something inside him if he moved too fast. Tessa looked at Ranger. Her eyes didn't blink, as if blinking might steal a second she needed. She whispered, barely breathing the words. I promised I'd take him home, not leave him in the snow." Ranger let out a faint exhale, like a dog sighing in sleep. Even as life slipped from him, Merrick felt something shift under his ribs, an echo from years he had tried to forget. The oath he had chosen when young, before compromise and bureaucracy dulled its edge. He placed a hand on Ranger's fur, still warm, and gave Tessa a nod she didn't need to ask for. "I'm not letting them bury anyone out here," he said quietly. Outside, the storm gathered again, but the room held a fragile warmth made of loyalty, pain, and a promise stronger than law. Snow settled on the windows like quiet ash, dimming the lantern's glow. Rizzo paced across the floor with slow, deliberate steps, his thick paws barely making a sound on the old wooden boards. Something in his posture had shifted. Less guard dog, more mourner, nose lowering again and again to the fading scent beneath his feet. Merrick watched him from the side of the cot where Tessa lay sleeping, her breaths thin, pulled through the cold like thread through cloth. K9 Ranger rested beside her, wrapped gently in Merrick's jacket, as if warmth could still offer dignity. Rizzo's nose pressed against the dog's shoulder. He lingered, then moved toward the torn vest Ranger had worn. He nosed it once, twice, then tugged at a stiff patch of fabric with surprising care, as if he knew there was still a task left unfinished. Merrick followed him, curiosity edged with dread. The vest felt heavier than expected, lined with frozen blood and the grit of tree bark. Rizzo pawed at one particular corner. Inside a small seam, Merrick found something slick and cold. A tiny waterproof packet, tucked beneath layers meant to stop knives and bullets. A nylon pouch. His pulse slowed. He opened it with gloved fingers. Inside lay a black USB drive, sealed tight, nearly weightless. Not the kind criminals bought, the kind law enforcement used when evidence needed to survive flood, fire, or war. Merrick felt the breath leave him slowly. Tessa had hidden evidence in the only partner certain to run through hell to bring it home. When Tessa stirred awake again, her voice broke like a weak branch. Check, file, stride, and Ellis. She didn't need to say anything more. Her eyes held the story, fear mixed with bitterness, the kind that grows only from betrayal wearing the same badge you swear by. Merrick plugged the USB into his field laptop. The screen glowed cold blue. Contracts appeared. Clean language about mountain relief shipments, emergency supplies, protective escort. But there were other documents beneath them, buried like bones. Shipment manifests containing fentanyl disguised as aid, schedules of routes that avoided federal oversight, and at the end, the file that felt like a nail hammered into faith, a patrol approval form, signed not in haste, but with confidence. A looping signature that looked neat, practiced, almost proud. Sergeant Corbin Ellis, authorizing protection for Stride's convoy, authorizing the route where Tessa was ambushed, authorizing silence. Merrick stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The badge on his chest seemed heavier, as though it no longer belonged to him. It felt like metal dragged from a grave. He closed the laptop gently, like laying a body to rest. Inside that still room, Rizzo lay down beside Ranger, close enough to share the last of his warmth. Merrick reached out and touched the dog's worn fur. There was no ceremony, no anger spoken aloud, just the quiet understanding that loyalty had died on one side of the badge and survived on the other. The storm pressed its cold cheek against the walls, as though listening. Merrick sat in the dim room, radio in hand, its black plastic warmed by his palm. The old lantern swayed on its hook, sending soft arcs of light over the floorboards, over Tessa's sleeping form, over the body of K9 Ranger wrapped in his jacket, and finally over Rizzo, silent, watchful, his heavy head resting near Tessa's boots. The dog didn't sleep. He guarded grief like something sacred. Merrick shifted, the weight of the USB in his pocket like a second badge, one that carried truth instead of authority. The truth felt heavier. A badge demands obedience. Truth demands sacrifice. He switched to the encrypted emergency channel, one reserved for officers who needed help, not to report corruption. The static cleared, crisp. Sergeant Ellis answered with a voice too calm for the hour. "Dalton, you're off duty. Go home. Don't make this dramatic." Merrick listened to the tone more than the words. Smooth, dry, almost entertained. Ellis's voice sounded like a man who had practiced pretending to care for so long he no longer remembered the difference. "You were never one for glory, Dalton," Ellis continued. "Don't try being a hero now. Heroes die young." It wasn't a threat. It was advice spoken like a lullaby, the kind that killed slowly. Merrick closed his eyes, hearing not the words but the emptiness behind them. He turned the radio off with a quiet click, like dropping soil over a grave. The room grew hushed. Merrick looked at Tessa, her breath barely lifting the blanket. He looked at Ranger, still and loyal even in death. And then Rizzo came closer, his massive head pressing against Merrick's wrist. The dog's amber eyes didn't command action. They offered presence, solidarity. Merrick let his gloved hand rest on Rizzo's paw. The gesture was small, but it carried a history of men and dogs who had faced dark things together, trusting each other more than the systems meant to guide them. The memory came uninvited. Sirens from years ago, his wife on a winter road, a runaway vehicle full of drugs, and the radio that had said, "Let them go, not worth the risk." A command disguised as caution, a decision that saved paperwork, not lives. His wife's voice had gone quiet forever because someone valued convenience over justice. He never forgot the officer who shrugged afterward, saying, "Bad timin', nothing we could do." Merrick swallowed hard, not from anger but from something deeper, an ache carried too long, finally finding a voice. His fingers curled around Rizzo's paw like a man holding on to a promise he had once abandoned. The words came out rough, softer than a prayer. "Not again. Not this time. We don't let 'em get away." Rizzo didn't bark. He pressed his paw back, slow and steady, as if sealing a pact older than the storm outside. Firelight flickered against the snow, bright as a false sunrise. The station walls trembled under the wind, but inside the air grew heavier, thick with the metallic sting of gasoline. Merrick felt it before he understood it. Rizzo felt it first. The cane Corso lifted his head, nostrils flaring. No growl this time. Only a sharp turn toward the door, as if pointing to an invisible storm. Merrick leaned close to the cracks along the frame. The scent was unmistakable. Fuel, not spilled, poured. Outside, footsteps crunched through the snow, too slow to be cautious, too calm to be afraid. These were men who believed they had already won. He heard a murmur through the wind, then the faint click of metal meeting metal. A lighter, or a trigger. He didn't need to know which. Tessa stirred on the cot, her arms wrapped protectively around the lifeless body of K9 Ranger. The young deputy's eyes were swollen, not from injury, but from the weight of love she could no longer give. "They're here," she whispered, voice trembling like wet paper. Merrick nodded once. No noise, no panic, just purpose. He motioned to the back wall, to the trap door half buried beneath a rusted medical cabinet. Years ago, when he was young and needed extra income, he had helped repair this place. He remembered sealing an old escape tunnel when flooding made the lower rooms unsafe. Now, flooded or not, it was their only chance. Rizzo stood beside him, muscles tight, eyes burning amber under the weak lantern light. The dog pressed his nose toward the floor, then toward the dark seam in the boards, finding the faint smell of frozen oxygen where cold air seeped in. Outside, a voice crackled through a megaphone, distorted by wind, but clear enough in malice. Tonight the snow buries everything. Tessa Bray never existed. It was Ellis, calm, professional, a man committing murder the way others signed paperwork. The hiss of fuel deepened, soaking the ground beneath the building. Merrick lifted the trapdoor, revealing a narrow drop into darkness. He helped Tessa descend with Ranger's body still against her chest. She clutched the dog like a mother cradling her child for the last time. The first spark ignited outside, small, almost gentle, like a match struck to light a candle. Flames spread in a silent sheet, crawling across the walls with hungry orange fingers. Rizzo moved last. Merrick whispered to him, a low command filled with trust, not fear. "Lead us?" The dog dropped into the tunnel, landing heavy but sure. Smoke rolled over Merrick's shoulders as he descended and shut the door behind him. The world above exploded in red light. Heat roared through the wood. For a moment it sounded like applause. They crawled through the cold passage, guided by Rizzo's instinct, toward air that tasted like metal and pine. Behind them, the station collapsed in a blaze that erased everything but truth. Tessa's tears fell silently onto Ranger's fur. She whispered, trembling but determined, "If we survive, we tell the world how he fought." Merrick placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Not if, Tessa," he said. "We will." Rizzo looked back once, eyes calm in the dark, as though already knowing the path ahead. Dawn crept into the mountains like pale paint brushed across stone. The sky was still gray when Merrick transmitted the false message. He sent it using the encrypted signature from the USB, just one silent line, claiming that Tessa Bray still held unbroken evidence. The lie moved quickly, faster than bullets or snow. Somewhere in the radio traffic, Malcolm Stride panicked. Men who build empires out of fear always fear the truth most. Within hours, Stride rerouted his convoy, demanding protection in Thorn Hollow, a narrow ravine carved deep by wind and time. Ellis had no choice but to stand with him. Betrayal forces loyalty where it never belonged. The mountains breathed cold air through the pines when Merrick and Rizzo reached the cliffs overlooking the hollow. Below, trucks idled like beasts waiting to flee. And in the center of them, Ellis stood wearing a supervisor's coat too clean for a murderer. His face looked tired, but not remorseful, only offended that someone had dared resist his control. The FBI team crept in from the ridge, boots scraping ice in nervous rhythm. Stride's men scanned the shadows with rifles dressed in snow covers. Merrick descended slowly, each step measured, like he was walking into a church or a confession. Beside him, Rizzo moved with the slow, heavy certainty of a creature who no longer feared pain. Ellis turned at the sound of boots. His eyes narrowed, and in one swift motion, he grabbed something from behind a supply crate, a knife. Before anyone could shout, he dragged forward a German shepherd, blood-stained but breathing. Ranger, the young K9, half-conscious, muzzle trembling, was being used as a shield. The blade pressed to his throat. Rizzo snarled softly, not in anger, but in warning. Ellis spoke, voice cracking with desperation disguised as authority. "Call them off, or the dog dies." Around them, the trucks growled. Agents froze. Stride whispered to Ellis like a coward, whispering prayers he never believed in. Merrick stepped forward alone, lifting both hands, letting his gun fall with a muted thud into the snow. His voice came low, steady, carrying years of pain without bitterness. You want to kill a K9 to save yourself? This dog is loyal to whoever chooses what's right. And you chose money. For a moment, only wind answered. Ranger's eyes flicked open, the dog's body tensed, not from fear, but instinct. At the same heartbeat, Rizzo lunged from Ellis's blind side, slamming into his leg. Ranger snapped awake with a violent surge and bit down on the wrist that held the knife. Ellis howled, a sound not of pain, but indignation, as if loyalty itself had betrayed him. The blade clattered. Merrick drew his backup weapon with a quiet motion faster than rage, slower than mercy. He fired once, clean into Ellis's shoulder, not to kill, but to anchor him to consequences he spent a lifetime escaping. Ellis fell, cursing, bleeding, alive. As agents moved in, Ranger collapsed. Again, exhausted, Merrick knelt beside him, hand steady on the dog's fur. "You're going home," he whispered, not to Tessa, not to the station, but to honor, to memory, to truth. Spring sunlight melted the snow in slow silver streams. The courthouse steps were crowded the morning they took Malcolm Stride away in federal cuffs. Ellis followed, pale and silent, his clean uniform now stained by a blood-dark sling around his shoulder. Cameras clicked like brittle ice breaking. Reporters shouted questions no one needed answers to anymore. Merrick stood at a distance with Rizzo at his side, the dog calm and steady, as if he understood that justice didn't celebrate, it simply endured. Merrick didn't smile, he didn't feel victorious. Justice, when done right, never tasted like triumph. It tasted like breath finally taken after being held too long. Days later, the most important moment happened far from courtrooms or cameras. A quiet veterinary clinic at the base of the mountain smelled of disinfectant, warm towels, and slow healing. K9 Ranger lay on a padded bed, his eyes half open, body stitched and bandaged, his breathing shallow but stubborn. Tessa sat beside him, wearing a simple gray sweater and borrowed boots, not as a deputy, but as someone who owed her life to loyalty. The young German shepherd tried to stand when he recognized her scent. His paws shook, his ribs trembled under the effort. Tessa reached forward, voice cracking like glass. "It's okay. You don't have to." But Ranger insisted. Inch by inch he moved, collapsing halfway, then dragging himself again until his head rested in her hand. She held him as if touching something holy. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from sadness, but gratitude fierce enough to break her. "You saved me," she whispered. "I'll tell everyone. We don't leave each other behind." Outside the clinic a month later, the wind carried spring earth instead of winter silence. Merrick stood beside a wooden sign newly placed into the soil, Dalton Rizzo Ranger K9 Academy. A training center built not just for dogs, but for officers willing to learn integrity from them. The letters were carved deep into the grain, meant to outlast storms. Rizzo sat next to him, massive and vigilant, wearing a simple K9 tag. No medals, no ceremony. A dog did not need decoration to prove devotion. Merrick watched the last snow recede down the ridge, revealing new grass beneath it, soft and green. He breathed slowly, letting the clean air fill every tired corner of him. In the hush of the moment, with mountains waking into spring, he understood what justice was meant for. "Justice isn't catching the guilty," he murmured almost to himself. "It's letting the good keep living with hope." Beside him, Rizzo lifted his head, the metal tag on his collar glinting in the sun like a quiet medal, earned through loyalty, not ceremony. In the wind, it chimed softly, almost like applause. When the storm passes and the noise fades, justice isn't the sound of sirens or chains. It's a quiet breath, a life saved, a loyal friend still standing beside you. Remember this, heroes aren't born from badges or titles, but from those who choose to protect, even when no one is watching. If this story moved you, Share it with someone who needs to believe that loyalty still matters. Leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to stay with us. May courage find you in ordinary days, and may peace follow every act of kindness.